Alright, cool. Let's get started. Welcome to GSC on this lovely Valentine's Day. Uh, yeah, today we're going to be talking about FMOD in Unity specifically. Since there's a plugin for FMOD, if you don't want to use the base Unity audio. So yeah, let's just get right into it. Today we'll be talking about a couple things. We'll talk about setting up the project in the optimal way, all the different components that are included with the plugin, and that'll be the bulk of it. Some code stuff that I don't really understand too well, but I'm going to talk about it anyways and have Anthony and Miles here kill me. And then some extra important things to go over that are directly related to the FMOD Unity plugin. And just getting right into her, setting everything up. It's not too crazy, especially now since the plugin got updated a couple months ago. I want to say like August maybe. It made it significantly easier since it opens up with a big setup wizard, which is super helpful. So before we even get into Unity though, just in the FMOD project, once you're ready to get everything in the game, which honestly I would recommend doing at any point in the process, like you have one or two sounds, just build it and get it in. But one thing you got to do is you got to go under edit and preferences and then go to the build settings. So just check out the platform settings, make sure everything isn't too compressed, everything isn't too uncompressed, because in that case everything will just be huge. And you'll just want to tweak any of these if for some reason you're wanting to release something on a different platform. Like for instance here I added a Switch platform just because I could. Or if you want to make everything super compressed for like mobile or something. But yeah, this is where you do stuff like that. Just wanted to point this out that this exists. But once you're cool with all that, you're going to want to build your project to all platforms. And then move both the .fs profile, so the FMOD project file, and the entirety of the build folder into a subdirectory of your Unity project. A good spot that I usually do is in the same directory, like the base directory. So there's the assets folder in the Unity project, and then I would also have FMOD proj as a folder, and that's where I would just lump everything in. And the reason I don't put it in the assets folder is because as soon as you put it in there, it makes a bunch of meta files, and you don't want that. So just keeping it outside of that keeps everything clean, and everything still works perfectly. Just briefly though, an alternative to building it and then copy and pasting the project would be to create the FMOD project and save it directly into your Unity project folder. So this would be one of the cases if you have the whole team contributing to sound or the whole team doing something. But the only real issue I have personally with this is that the assets folder can get pretty hefty. Like the FMOD assets folder, not the Unity assets folder. So the assets can get pretty big since sound can get pretty big. But along with that, all of the thousands of meta files that are created when you build up your project more and more, you'll be committing those pretty much every time you make any changes. And that's a bit much if the team doesn't necessarily need it. So for people like me, that's the only sound person on my team, I'm just better off doing the project separately in my FMOD projects folder, and then I just copy and paste everything over when it's ready. And that way I don't accidentally commit something, I don't accidentally do anything, and it keeps everything clean for everyone else. But yeah, if you do want to go this route anyways, you can still just git ignore everything that isn't in the build folder or that isn't the FS profile or FS profile, because that basically does the same thing. And yeah, you'll be good to go after that. So moving out of FMOD Studio, let's move over to Unity. So like I said, there's a super helpful wizard that pops up now. We all love wizards here. We're gamers. Wizards are usually helpful. So what you got to do to get this nice wizard to pop up is just download the plugin through the package manager in Unity. But I do want to note real quick, you should probably get this as early as possible for a project, just so it doesn't cause any issues later down the line. And honestly, it's as simple as just going through the prompts in the setup wizard. It was not this easy 5-6 months ago, so it's fantastic that they added this. But just looking through it, you got the welcome, that's just the welcome screen. Updating is for any past versions of FMOD, so you can just ignore that in most cases. Linking would be linking your project to the thing. Listener would be replacing the listeners in the scene. Unity audio, that's disabling it. Unity sources, if you have any audio sources in the scene that are using the Unity source, that just flips everything out. And then source control, that is for a couple of git lines that you can add to your git ignore. And yeah, so linking your project, this is what that screen looks like. And what you're going to want to do if you're going to do the FMOD project folder like I just recommended, then you would just click the FMOD Studio project and then find it. And then it would say using the FMOD Studio project at whatever folder, whatever project file is called. The single platform build, that would just be the build folder for a single platform, as you would expect from single platform build. And shockingly, multiple platform build is the build folder, but for multiple platforms. So I would personally recommend the FMOD Studio project one, just because it's everything and it's super easy. And we do have it, so you might as well. Especially since it doesn't really add up any more space. But the other two, they work. There's a reason why those exist. And yeah, go through the rest of the setup and you'll be good to go. Now onto the git ignore stuff. All this can be found in the FMOD setup wizard, and this is basically just letting things work without making things too painful. I'm not going to dwell on this slide too much. You don't need to copy this down. Like I said, it's all in the setup wizard, so you can just copy and paste that. But yeah, the shorthand of it, it just keeps things working without a billion commits every time. Now, moving on to the FMOD components. So like the normal Unity audio, there is a lot of components that are included with this. A couple more than the Unity audio and a few less. Like it doesn't have a billion filters, since those are all done through FMOD. But let's get right into it. First one and most important, the listener. This must be included for 3D positional sounds to work, because like the Unity listener, shockingly, this is the ears. This is what you put on the camera usually. And yeah, this is where it'll be able to hear the 3D positional sounds in the world. However, unlike the Unity listener, there can be up to 8 of these. So each of these is assigned a different index at runtime, and this is primarily used for split screen stuff. So if you're just doing a single player thing, you don't need to worry about that. If you're doing split screen, you might want to worry about this, and you might want to look into this for how it works a bit. Attenuation object. So this is basically just a game object that you can drop into the listener, and this will change the position of attenuation for the audio. So let's say you're doing a top-down game, and the camera's like 300 feet above everything. It's an RTS or something like that, but you want the audio to be down there. Like you want to hear all the units moving and stuff like that. You can just drop or like project something like an empty game object directly down, and wherever that goes, like you can move that with the camera, and that could be the attenuation object. So when the sounds go to that, or the sounds are picked up by the attenuation object, even if the listener isn't on it. So yeah, it's also useful for third-person games if you want to place it somewhere that isn't on the camera. All right, vent emitter. This is arguably the most important one. I did say the listener was the most important, but they're both equally important because you can't hear sounds if you don't have sounds, and you can't tell if you have sounds if you're not hearing it. But like the normal emitter or the sound source in the Unity audio, this is the source of the sound in the scene. That's a lot of S's. And it's used for both 2D and 3D events. And there's no limit to the amount of emitters on the same event, which is pretty useful for stuff like all the world sounds, like music and ambience, that sort of thing. I usually put those all in one object just to make things easy and well organized. Play and stop event. We're just going to go through each of the things. Play and stop event both have the same options in the component, so we'll just go through all those real quick. And these are also used as trigger conditions for the other parameter triggers. So we'll be talking about those very shortly. So what those trigger conditions are, you got object start, object destroy. Those are called when the start function of an object runs, so the first frame of it being called, and object destroy is called when a scene or the game ends. None, I should have probably started with none. None means that you'll be triggering this through code or a Unity event or something, both of which we'll touch on in a couple slides. Trigger exit and enter, that's with trigger colliders. So when you set up a trigger volume, there's an is trigger. You just click that, and boom, when the collision object with a tag on it enters it, that's when this will play, or exits it. That's when it'll play. And same thing with 2D. Collision enter, similar, but it's when the is trigger is not toggled on. So you just walk into an object, it makes that sound. Or like if a bullet hits a wall, that would be something in this case. But yeah, there's a lot of use cases for that. Object enable and disable are both pretty self-explanatory. Mouse enter and exit are the same as the trigger ones, except for your mouse. And mouse up and down are also pretty self-explanatory. Since you got an emitter on the object, you're going to want to route an event to it. So right below the stop event is where you do that. You either click the magnifying glass to open up the event browser, you click the magnifying glass to just get a list of all the events, and then you can find it there. If you click the folder, that'll open up the event browser, which is pretty cool. But we'll get to that eventually. It's a little window that pops up. Or the weirdest option, which you'll probably never use, you can create a new event by clicking that plus button, which I would personally never go for. I wouldn't say I would recommend it, just because it's a bit of a weird one, and you might as well just create it yourself in the project when you're planning all this out. Along with setting the event, if you click the drop down there, because right beside the word event there's a little arrow, if you click that drop down, there's a bunch of useful information about the event, so like the GUID, which the second years should be familiar with at this point. But for everyone else, this is the globally unique identifier. It's basically just a string that tells the FMOD API what event this is in that project. Along with that, it also says which bank it's in, whether it's 2D or 3D, whether the asset is streamed or not, and whether it's a loop or a one-shot. And we'll go through the rest of these on the next slide. Starting off strong though, override attenuation does what you'd expect. It overrides the attenuation of the object, or of the event, and you can change this manually in the scene view as well. Please note that this is only a thing on 3D events. If you put a 2D event object in here and expect to change the attenuation, that won't work, since obviously 2D events have no attenuation. They're not in the world space. So yeah, just keep that in mind. If it's not working, it's probably because there's no spatializer on the event in FMOD. Alright, next thing, pretty important, parameter values. These can be set here manually, but it only covers the initial value. So any parameters that are in this event, they could just be added here by clicking the add, and it'll be a list of them. But any parameters that you want to change in runtime, so let's say I had a parameter on this event, add julks, and it controlled the volume or something, or like the distance traveled or something like that, I don't know. Let's say I had a parameter on there and I wanted to change that during runtime. I had to do that either through code or like an event or something. So that's for stuff like adaptive music. They're changed through a parameter trigger component, or through code or something like that. All right, now the advanced options drop down. Don't let the word advanced scare you. It's not really too crazy, and some of this stuff is super useful and important to know. So sample or preload sample data loads the data for the event into memory at the level start and is kept in memory until the scene ends. So definitely don't do this with big stuff. Definitely don't do this with the stuff that is played once. You might want to just keep things that are used a lot and are very short in memory at all times. But the great thing about this is that it plays with basically no latency. So you definitely want to be careful with how big this file is. But yeah, it's good to know what this does. Allow fade out when stopping is probably the most important thing I've ever seen. It lets any AHDSR modulation play. So if you're doing literally anything with one of those, you might as well keep this checked for pretty much everything. But what that is basically you click play, and by default it will build up the volume or build up whatever it is to the peak from 0, and then it'll hold that until you stop the event, and then it'll release, which is what the R stands for at the end of that. And then it'll like fade out. It's usually good for volume stuff, but you can use it for a lot of cool things. And last but not least, trigger once means that it will only play the first time the event is called. So any other time that you trigger it, it just won't do anything. So if a sound plays once at the beginning but just doesn't play again, you might want to look at that. All right, bank loader. You gotta load a bank for the event to play. So in the settings, it's set to load all by default. So you don't really need this 90% of the time. But if you have a ridiculous amount of sounds and you want to use banks, to be very careful with what you load into memory, and just not keep everything in, even if they're tiny, which banks usually are. You might want to use these instead. So just go into the settings, switch that to none, and then you can use these bank loaders to load in different banks. But you can also do this with code. Most of this you can do with code. The listener is the only thing that I don't recommend doing with code, just because it's weird. But yeah, you can use code or just use this bank loader. And load and unload, both of those use the same trigger conditions as the emitter. So you can do like on object start, on trigger enter, on trigger exit, whatever it is. And preload sample data, once again, that's preloading the data from the sample, keeps it in memory until the scene ends. Alrighty, now parameter triggers. These ones are cool. Basically, these target an object. So you drag and drop in a game object, usually some sort of trigger volume. And if something happens with that object, one of the trigger conditions that you pick from the dropdown, it will affect this parameter, which is super cool. And multiple emitters on one object is perfectly fine with this. There will be a parameter for each of them if both have them. So let's say there were 2 emitters on that cube, one of them for the event add jilks. Let's say another one was like AD or ASDF or something like that. But both of them had 2 different parameters. Cool, that's fine. They would all drop down there. But yeah, these things are fantastic for trigger volumes, especially for on trigger, enter and exit. This is what I used for adaptive music, being super simple. Like you would walk into an area, you'd pass through a trigger volume, cool. It switches to the next part of the track. So yeah, definitely want to get familiar with these if you're doing pretty much anything that's triggering different parameters. And similarly, we have the global parameter trigger. This is kind of a useless slide, so I made the picture gigantic, but in essence, it's almost the exact same as the parameter trigger, except It doesn't require a target object, it just overrides the value normally, since there's only one global parameter. Alright, now we're getting into part where the coders here will murder me. And I just want to clarify, I did reach out a little bit, but I wrote this section without them knowing. So yeah, if I wrote something wrong, please say it. Cause I don't touch the scripts that much, but I looked into it a little bit, so it should be fine. Alright, so we got FMOD specific things. We got playing and stopping events. That's get component, Unity or FMOD Unity Studio Event Emitter, and there's a couple of functions there. The important ones are play and stop, and that's just for if the event emitter is on an object, which you're gonna want to do. It's just easier that way. Loading and unloading banks, again, get component, load, unload, shocking. But set parameters, that's a cool one, since these are a lot more, I guess modular, that's the word of the day, than all the events and stuff. So you want to change something in code, cool, create an emitter object, and then you do set parameter, the name of the parameter, and then the value you want to change it to. So for something like, just trying to think of an example. Oh, when the player gets hit or something, so their health goes down, there's not really any sort of triggers there. Yes, you could do if they collide with spikes or something, then do something there. But let's say the health goes down and you have different sounds for different levels of health, or like you have a low pass filter that's applied to everything, like when an explosion goes off nearby. You do something like that, you would go, okay, emitter, if health equals like 5 or whatever, and then in that you would set the parameter there using that. I made that way more complex than it needed to be, but this is how you set parameters, and the other two things you probably won't need to do, but you can do them there anyways. Alrighty, and last but not least, Unity events are extremely helpful since they let people like me, and artists and that sort of thing, touch code, even though the programmers don't want us to, but we can touch it and we can stick things in, which is great. But basically all you gotta know here is that you click the plus button. So the bottom left is what it looks like in the inspector. You click the plus button, it'll add something, and then you add an object with the emitter on it, the bank loader, parameter trigger, whatever it is, and then you click on the function, and you'll go down to the studio event emitter, or whatever it is, and just pick the function you want it to do. So there's play for studio event emitters, there's stop, if you want to stop a loop, that sort of thing. For parameters, you can set a parameter there, but it will just call the function, so it's not super useful. But yeah, and if there's multiple emitters, you'll get what I put in the bottom right. There will be 2 emitter objects. It's crazy. But yeah, you just got to keep track of which one is first, and you'll be good there. Yeah, before I accidentally turn this into GPC part 2, let's get back into audio to look at the last few things, just before we wrap up for the night. So, some extra important things. Live update is going to be talked about here. It's one of my favorite things. Yeah, let's get right into it. So, the debug overlay is really annoying sometimes. I know my team wanted to get rid of it for a while. And you don't want it on there when you're taking screenshots, that sort of thing. And unlike the stats thing in Unity, there isn't just a super handy dandy button right at the top of the game mode that you can just click. But this is how you disable it. You go into the settings for FMOD. So you click the drop down at the top of the window, FMOD. You go into the settings there. You go under platform specific, editor, debug overlay, and just toggle it on or off. But it's super useful for us if you want to use it. Like it tells you everything you need to know. It's basically a mini profiler. But the profiler in FMOD is also definitely something that should be used. and I'm kicking myself right now because I forgot to put it in this slideshow. So that's fine. Use the profiler in FMOD as well when you connect to your project through Live Update. Definitely use the profiler. Alrighty, the event browser. I talked about this very briefly. This is the thing that pops up when you click the folder when you're looking for an event. It's pretty useful. I personally haven't used it a ton, but it's useful for checking things, making sure everything works properly. Browsing, it's in the name. But it's got all the data from the events dropdown from the emitter component as well. So it's got the bank it's in, the panning, whether or not it's a one-shot, the length of the thing, which is a new one. But it's also got a preview. So you have a 3D positional preview if you want to hear how it sounds around you, if it's a 3D sound. And you can also click the FMOD logo to just open up FMOD Studio and listen to it there. But what this is it contains a list of all the events, all the banks, snapshots, global parameters, all the stuff. And yeah, when you click on them, it shows different things. Banks, specifically, they show the platform size. So if I clicked on bank A, it would say like default, however many megabytes or kilobytes, and then switch, because I made a switch platform for some reason. It would say like 420 megabytes or whatever it was. But it'll show how big it is, so you know, okay, I'm loading this much into memory if I just keep this in here at all times. And global parameters, this is useful. It shows the min and max values. This is less useful for us, I would say, as sound designers, and more useful if somebody's implementing something for you, or if you want to double check something down the line. Alright, live update. Here we go. This is one of my favorite things. It allows for real-time mixing and tweaking with FMOD. So it basically just connects the FMOD Studio platform to your Unity project, which is super cool. And yeah, it's edited or enabled by default in the editor, so you definitely want to take advantage of it. But there's just a couple things you got to do for this. In FMOD Studio, you got to click Live Update Off in the bottom. I said bottom left, but it's in the bottom right corner. You click that, it'll pop up with a pop-up, and it'll say connect to localhost. Just click that. You don't need to change any IPs or anything. It'll pop an error real quick and just say retry in background, and then you switch over to your Unity editor and hit play. It is as simple as that. But you do want to know it only works when you're running the game in the editor or in the build if you've enabled that. But yeah, this right in the corner there, that's in the FMOD settings. It just has that little thing that says, hey, is live update enabled? Yeah, okay, this is what port it's in. So for some reason, if you want to change the port, you can do that there. But yeah, live update. You're going to want to use the mixer window in FMOD Studio for this. Otherwise, I don't know why you'd use live update. But yeah, this is basically how you use it. This is definitely the easiest way to go about using it with the live Unity project. So yeah, open the mixer window for peak use. But the biggest thing that I want to note here is that if you change a bunch of settings, you get it mixed perfectly, you're like, cool, I'm very happy with this. If you just close Unity and close FMOD, it will not commit it to the Unity project. So you do have to build the banks and copy and paste them back into the project for the changes to be made. It's a little annoying, a little frustrating. I didn't know this at first, so I was like, okay, I don't know why there's no changes in this commit, but that's fine, right? It should be fine. It wasn't. Everything was still very loud. So you're going to want to make sure you remember that if you take advantage of this. And yeah, live update is an excellent way to get the best possible mix for your game. Just for a bit of marketing speak, I am not GSC is not funded by FMOD. We just love their stuff. But yeah, coming in just under 30 minutes. This is the only thing I used. It's the integration tutorial. Definitely use it. It's cool. It's a great resource. Alright, thanks for coming out. Next week we have reading week. Not that it really matters right now since we don't really have class. But next week, or the week after next week, since we don't have a session next week, is super important. We've got another guest speaker coming out. We got the freelance composer that is behind games such as Super Animal Royale and Dune Sea, many other games. We got Jake Boutino. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Jake. He's coming in to drop some more insights. You don't want to miss this. He's a freelance Canadian composer. Super awesome guy. Yeah, he's going to be coming out. Definitely don't want to miss that. Tell your friends, tell your dog. It'll be great.